If it's Monday, the Senate delivers a major boost to the president's agenda, passing a massive climate, health care, and tax reform package. But will it mean a boost for Democrats politically with just 3 months until the midterms? Plus, fatal flooding aftermath. President Biden tours hard-hit parts of Kentucky, meeting with victims of the nation's deadliest flash flood in decades, as the state braces for even more severe weather. That's ahead. And later, abortion bans and political backlash. Indiana's newly enacted near-total ban prompts immediate criticism from local, federal, and business leaders. What it means for November and the fight for reproductive rights ahead. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chris Jansing. Can Democrats translate a major legislative win into a major change in midterm momentum? They're about to find out, because after more than a year of negotiations and inter-party tensions, a $700 billion reconciliation package, which Democrats call the Inflation Reduction Act, cleared the Senate after a marathon 22-hour session. The Democratic-controlled House plans to vote on it Friday, and it is expected to pass narrowly. If it does pass, it'll then head to the president's desk to be signed into law. The bill's impacts will be far-reaching, but they may not be felt quickly. It contains major reforms to Medicare, most notably allowing the government program to negotiate prescription drug prices and capping out-of-pocket costs. It would also be the single biggest investment in combating climate change in U.S. history, albeit with some concessions to the fossil fuel industry. Funding it all? A 15% corporate minimum tax, a new tax on stock buybacks, and beefed-up IRS enforcement of the existing tax code. The deal is a far cry from the original multi-trillion-dollar bill that the president and Democrats initially wanted, but the party is nonetheless hailing it as a big win. And it caps off a sudden burst of deal-making on Capitol Hill, putting the president's first term on course to be one of the most accomplished in modern history when it comes to getting major legislation through a deeply divided Congress. Some of those major bills have included a nearly $2 trillion pandemic spending bill, a roughly $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill, the first new gun law in nearly 30 years, a much-needed investment in semiconductor manufacturing, and now this latest reconciliation bill. But with inflation and abortion taking center stage, the big question facing Washington right now is, what will it matter to voters this November? Well, on his way to visit flood-ravaged Kentucky this morning, the president said the reconciliation bill will help Democrats in the midterms, but he also acknowledged it may take some time for voters to see and feel its benefits.
Do I expect it to help? Yes, I do. It's going to immediately help. There's a whole range of things that are really game changers for ordinary folks. Now, some of it's not going to kick in for a little bit, but it's all good. It's really going to lower the daily. When you sit down at that kitchen table at the end of the month, you'll be able to pay a whole hell of a lot more bills.
NBC's Monica Alba is at the White House for us. NBC's Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. Hey, Monica, so President Biden is planning to have multiple bill signing ceremonies this week. But how much does the White House get credit? How much do they deserve for this list of legislative accomplishments?
Well, this is a really notable case, Chris, because if we do rewind back to December when, remember what this bill was originally branded as, Build Back Better, those talks fell apart in December, and it was the president himself in January who said, I think I made a mistake by being too involved, by rushing down to Capitol Hill, heading to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, trying to woo lawmakers himself or bring the Democratic Party together, and seeing that not work on a couple of occasions. So instead, they really decided that the president should take a step back, that the White House legislative team, of course, would still be in touch with Leader Schumer and that they would be talking to senators throughout the process. But they took on more of a Fight Club mentality, I'm told by officials, and that what's the first rule of Fight Club? We don't talk about it. So we all knew it was kind of going on behind the scenes, but they weren't coming out and having these big meetings where lawmakers were coming to the White House, and then there was a big show of force, and they would come to the microphones and spill the details and haggle in public. Instead, these talks, again, occurred a little bit more in private because because the White House felt that that might be a strategy that would pay off. And Democrats will be the first to say they didn't get everything they wanted in this bill, but that, of course, the fact that it did amount to something when it did appear dead on arrival a couple of times is a major success. So the president now has to take the next step of becoming really the salesman of this. And I think what you saw, that sound you just played, is a little bit of expectation setting. He does want to make sure people know this may not help you in the immediate, but it will hopefully in the long run, Democrats in this White House will argue. And that's something he's going to be talking about in September and October when he's on the road ahead of the midterms. But you're going to couple these legislative victories, the White House says, with some other factors going on. The fact that just this last week, the president saw those record jobs numbers, the killing of the leader of al-Qaeda, gas prices are coming down. So they feel like a lot of that is going in the right direction, and then they feel really emboldened by this newer momentum of these victories in the last couple weeks, Chris.
For their part, Sahil, the Republicans are complaining loud and long, but the IRA is on its way to the White House. Is there anyone who thinks this isn't on a glide path to the president's desk right now?
Yeah, I talked to Chris. The Senate was about 95% of the battle won, if not 99% of the battle won. The House has already passed a much bigger version of this, and this is essentially a scaled-back version of the Build Back Better Act that the House passed last year, which is expected to sail through the House of Representatives. Every Democratic lawmaker and aide I've talked to in the last 24 hours believes it will pass. The Rules Committee is meeting this Wednesday. The final vote will happen on the floor of the chamber this Friday. And then, of course, it's on to the midterms. One of the things, in addition to what Monica pointed out, currently President Biden's approval rating is very low, and his approval numbers on inflation and the economy are particularly abysmal. This, if it does, boost those numbers by convincing voters that the president is working with Congress to do something about inflation, that could have a significant impact not only on his standing, but also that of Democrats who are weathering very tough political headwinds this fall as they try to survive in the 2022 elections.
Well, yeah, Monica, let me ask you about those two political headwinds essentially coming together, because the president does want to get out there. He wants to tout this bill. He wants to tout his legislative accomplishments. But is he going to be welcome in some of those swing districts by Democrats?
Oh, it's an excellent question, Chris, and something that this White House knows they have to be a little bit careful about, because actually they wanted to test some of that in the last couple of weeks. They had trips planned to some battleground states and swing districts that they had to cancel because the president had COVID and then rebounded. So he was in the White House for 18 straight days where they were hoping to do a little bit of this. But this is something that absolutely they're going to want to send the president into. This is a president who relishes being with people and going in and campaigning, and they know the goal is to get him out on the road, even though he hasn't been able to do much of that. So they're absolutely aware of that. But yes, inflation and abortion are these two issues that come up again and again in conversations with White House officials. When it comes to inflation, they're hopeful that if this does pass, which they are optimistic about, that there will be some help there. And again, they continue to point to things like gas prices coming down. But then also, it's a very interesting story when we talk about abortion rights. This White House was very encouraged by what they saw in Kansas last week, where those voters overwhelmingly rejected that abortion restrictions would have been essentially the protections would have been taken out of the state constitution. But then you saw what happened on Friday in Indiana, and that's something that the White House called a despicable and devastating act. But that's something they're also banking on potentially energizing voters. So they're going to be going into districts where they feel that could help them talk about what is at stake on the ballot and but they also are completely aware of the political reality that it's usually pretty painful for the party in power when it comes to these midterms. And that's something that White House officials, of course, are bracing for. And that's, again, why I think you think the president is the one also to set those expectations a little bit. But they have a little bit of renewed hope about how this could change in the next 3 months.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Sahil. Democrats in the House know that they're going against historical trends in trying to even begin to think about holding control of the House. Having said that, obviously they're going to run on these legislative accomplishments. What about Republicans?
Well, look, the Democrats, for starters, are looking at every opportunity they can get to try to weather this storm going forward. I mean, it would take nothing short of a miracle for Democrats to hold the House of Representatives with such narrow margins already, given that the party in power typically loses dozens of seats in a midterm election, when they have a president of their own party in the White House. So Democrats see the prescription drug policies in this bill as a way to try to appeal to swing voters who want this in huge numbers, especially older older voters, especially older women, 50 and above, who float between the two parties. And then to motivate their base, Democrats see the largest investment in combating climate change as a way to encourage young voters to show up and say the Democratic Party is actually doing something about these priorities. As for Republicans, the playbook is very simple. It's to argue that the name is deceptive and this bill will only make inflation worse. They argue there's a lot of spending in here that's going to, continue to supercharge the money supply in the economy, and that costs will continue to go up. And, as far as Republicans are concerned, they want to make this a referendum on President Biden. They want to keep his numbers down where they are right now. So the messaging war is on at this point. Once this bill reaches the president's desk, it's going to be a question of which side can communicate to voters that their priorities, that their plans are better.
Sahil, Monica, thank you both. And joining me now is Nevada Democratic Congressman Steve Horsford, whose district Republicans are targeting to flip this November. So, look, you know that Sahil's right. They're going to say this is only going to make inflation worse. We know that gas prices have been coming down. Democrats have that on their side. But in terms of this bill, once it gets signed, actually having impact, actually people feeling it in their pocketbooks, can it happen quickly enough to help folks like you?
Well, thank you for having me on, Chris. It's great to be able to talk about these issues. And this is all about putting people over politics. At the beginning of your show, you talked about a number of legislative achievements that the Democrats in the House and the Senate, along with the president, have advanced for the American people. And this week, with the Inflation Reduction Act, we're going to continue to do that by reducing costs for seniors, with their prescription drug costs, including a provision that I helped to advance to cap out-of-pocket cost at $2,000 per person, lowering energy costs, which is one of the major drivers of inflation, and helping to reduce healthcare costs, which is still one of the most important issues that people in my district talk to me about and are facing right now.
So for people who say to you, and I'm sure you'll get this on the campaign trail, my food costs are still way too high, my housing costs have gone way up, or my kid who just graduated college can't find an apartment that he or she can afford, what are you going to say to them? Tell me how you think this is going to play in your election campaign.
Well, in addition to this legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, which does, again, reduce costs for constituents right here in Nevada and all across the country, we are working to actually tackle other issues, including the higher cost of housing. I've introduced the HOME Act, the housing oversight and mitigating exploitation, where we've seen these corporate out-of-state speculators buying up properties and driving up costs. And so in addition to the legislation that we're moving on, we're going to continue to put people over politics and continue to address their issues, not the issues of special interests and big corporations.
So let's talk taxes, because the one thing you don't want to do on the campaign trail is defend higher taxes. And while these are targeted to corporations and top earners, this bill does raise taxes in a period of economic downturn. Republicans are already trying to take advantage of that. What do you say to folks who say any tax increase right now, when the recession word is still out there, is a mistake?
The only people talking about raising taxes on families, on hardworking Americans, are Republicans who've advanced a written agenda to do just that, including to defund Social Security and to roll back benefits under Medicare. So, as you rightfully noted, this bill targets 150 corporations with income of $1 billion or more that are not paying their fair share. And it's about closing tax loopholes so that they can actually contribute to the needs of our country at a critical moment, so that we reduce costs on consumers and make those who are not contributing now pay their share by closing those tax loopholes.
You just heard Monica reporting that the White House is looking at two big issues in the November elections. One, we just talked about, which is the economy and inflation. The other is abortion. You support abortion rights. Your opponent says he will sponsor federal legislation to curb abortion access. So in the wake of the overturning of Roe, what do you see as the full stakes of your election?
Well, what I see is that women deserve to have the freedom to make their own health care decisions. And we should not allow an ideologically driven Supreme Court or conservatives in Congress, if they're able to win a majority, to impose a federal ban on a woman's freedom to make her own health care decisions. This is about choice, but it's also about contraception. It's also about what other rights are going to be eroded. And we're not going back. I've been talking to my constituents, and they don't want to go back to the days where women don't have the freedom to make their own decisions, where voting rights are being deteriorated, where we lose the benefits under the Affordable Care Act. We're not going back to those days. We're going forward. And the American people know that this is a consequential election and that there are clear choices. And so my record is very clear, and I'm willing to put my record up against my opponents when it comes to giving women the freedom to make their own health care decisions.
It looks like the president in Lexington, Kentucky has just walked over. I can't tell. Control room, can we listen? All right, let's listen in.
I'm sorry to say that you're in the polls, with due respect to the polls, you're very, your polls are terrible. But your message seems to be reaching out to people. Why aren't they hearing?
Well, it's a long way home. Fact is that we've been divided for so long, and it's only recently that we have any kind of movement, and I think you're going to see a lot change. I talked to him. He knows he's already invited. I invited him the first time I went down. No, I don't think so. I don't think he has to. He's got a Senate to run.
What was your message to the families, the flood victims whose homes were damaged, when you were talking with them? What was your message to them?
The message was we're going to stay till they're fixed. Thanks.
So some brief comments from the president as he's leaving Lexington, Kentucky, where he met with families devastated by those floods. Let me ask you one more question, Congressman Horsford. Would you like to see Joe Biden come and campaign for you in your district?
Look, I welcome the president. The vice president will be here later this week. This is about the American people. And what I see there is a president who actually cares, has concern, and is committed to meeting the needs and the challenges of the American people, whether it's those who are facing floods in Kentucky, those who are facing wildfires out here in the West, families who've been affected by gun violence in Uvalde and in Buffalo. He is someone who is committed to making sure that American families are lifted up at this critical moment in this time. And so I'm going to stay focused on doing my work, representing my district and delivering for them, putting people over politics. But I welcome those who can help us get that message out and make sure that the American people know what's at stake in this upcoming election.
Congressman Stephen Horsford, thank you so much for being on the program. We appreciate it. And coming up, President Biden, again, we just saw him leaving after the tour of flood-ravaged Kentucky as that state tries to recover from the worst flooding disaster in its history. And even more rain is in the forecast in the coming days. We will have the latest from the ground, along with an interview with a top FEMA official. Plus, Election Eve in battleground Wisconsin, what we're watching for in the state's key primaries with a battle for Senate control on the line. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. You saw it live just a minute ago. President Biden on Air Force One about to take off to Washington from Kentucky, where, of course, he was touring the damage caused by the worst flooding in that state's history. The president met with families whose homes were destroyed and, of course, now have a long road to recovery ahead. It comes a day after the president made additional federal resources available to address that devastation. It killed at least 37 people after more than 8 inches of rain fell in less than 48 hours. And the National Weather Service warns that more thunderstorms are in the forecast this week.
It is true that the people here in this community in Western Kentucky and the folks I met in the tornado, they're not just Kentuckians, they're Americans. They're Americans. This happened in America, American problem. And we're all Americans. Everybody has an obligation to help. We have the capacity to do this. It's not like it's beyond our control. The weather may be beyond our control for now, but it's not beyond our control. And I promise you, we're staying, the federal government, along with the state and county and the city, we're staying until everybody's back to where they were.
Today's trip also comes less than 8 months after President Biden visited Kentucky to assess damage caused by a series of tornadoes that killed 77 people statewide. As disaster officials across the country brace for more natural disasters aimed amid the intensifying effects of climate change. With me now, Ann Bink, Associate Administrator for FEMA's Office of Response and Recovery. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. In the last month, FEMA has dealt with flooding in an urban area, St. Louis, that rural area, Kentucky, I'm sure many more. Describe the challenges that you've been facing with this crazy weather this winter, this summer, and the challenges that are ahead for the folks there.
Absolutely. We have experienced 2 1 in 1,000 year storms over just that last week with the St. Louis area and, of course, eastern Kentucky as well. The administrator with the president and first lady, as you expressed, were on the ground today in Breathitt County in a city called Jackson. In Jackson County, there's a river, North Fork Kentucky River. It crested over 21 feet during the height of the storm about 11 days ago. I have been on the ground last week to meet with my team to continue to expedite response and recovery efforts near Troublesome Creek in Knott County and Perry County as well, near Lost Creek. Again, those areas have been devastated. I saw it firsthand with my team on the ground and with our state counterparts. With our local counterparts, not only responding to their communities, but having experienced disaster themselves. I met with one county judge who actually lost his home, and instead of taking care of his home, he was working with the community to help them recover. Just an incredible show of spirit and community in Kentucky.
We look at these pictures, we look at the video, and you know this very well because you've been on the ground, but no video can really show you what it's like when you're there, the extent of the devastation, how much people have lost. In the days and weeks ahead, what are the immediate what's the immediate help that the federal government can provide for these folks? And as you look at this, it looks like, what, years of rebuilding there?
It will certainly be a long recovery effort, but as the administrator said today, FEMA will be with Kentuckians every step of the way. We have swiftly turned on aid, thanks to the president. We now have 7,000 registrations for families and individuals who are impacted by the flooding. That registration process allows folks that have been impacted by the storm to recover, to rebuild their homes, to replace the things that were lost during the flooding. We've already released $13 million in assistance through that program to over 1,000 residents that were impacted by the flooding. Those numbers will continue to grow over time as we continue to assess the situation on the ground. And really what we're doing on the ground is making sure that we're meeting Kentuckians where they are. There were a lot of bridge washouts, many road washouts, as well as private bridges. This is an area of the country where a lot of the creeks are crossed by private bridges that reach several homes on the other side. Many of those have been washed out as well. So what we're doing on the ground is taking our teams to the doors of folks that have suffered from this disaster, making sure they can register and they understand what's next in the recovery as they move forward.
When you look at the best case scenario, what are scientists telling you? What's the real world impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, and how quickly might we see that impact?
So first, I'd like to applaud the administration and Congress for addressing climate through the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a $370 billion bill that will address climate change. Certainly, there are many efforts in that bill that will advance the efforts not only of our country, but internationally as well, to really set the pace. This is the first of its kind, and certainly FEMA has always been a partner in resiliency. We invest in resiliency before disasters through the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. And just a few weeks ago, the president announced $2.3 billion to support fiscal year 22 resilience efforts in building to really harden communities against the impacts of extreme weather. And we also, through response and recovery funding after a disaster, invest in resiliency efforts as communities are building back their infrastructure. So we really take a multi-pronged effort here at FEMA to ensure that we're building back to really address what will be the extreme weather of the future.
So much work ahead. Good luck as you continue to do it. Ann Bink, thank you for your time today. And up next, the search for solutions as educators, parents, and kids across America face a nationwide teacher shortage with the start of the school year fast approaching, or in some cases already here. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Just as millions of families gear up to send kids back to school, officials are sounding the alarm on a massive teacher shortage plaguing schools across the country. It's prompted a mad dash for potential solutions to the issue. NBC correspondent Jesse Kirsch has more.
The school year's first bell is also an alarm bell as schools nationwide struggle to find enough teachers.
We're seeing what I guess we could call a mad scramble to try to fill classrooms.
Florida alone has more than 8,000 teacher openings and almost 6,000 support positions unfilled.
There's been a teacher shortage for years. What you're seeing now is that it's reached a tipping point.
The American Federation of Teachers says issues like low salaries aren't new, but the pandemic has pushed more educators away.
Teachers have assumed so many more responsibilities in the aftermath of COVID, and yet have to do all the old things.
The nation's second largest teachers union recommends several solutions, including a salary bump. School districts in Nevada and Texas are already paying up.
Look, we had to do something to stop the bleeding.
The Dallas Independent School District is offering $60,000 to start, plus signing bonuses and other incentives.
Dallas is doing everything they can.
That strategy also includes letting teachers start before they're fully certified. Arizona and Alabama, two more states where teaching qualifications are being relaxed.
We want to get highly qualified teachers in every school.
In Florida, military veterans who served 4 years can now become teachers even without a bachelor's degree.
As a student, I just would want my teacher to be educated in what they're teaching us about, just so that we can succeed.
Would we even be thinking about this if it was a pilot or an engineer or a doctor? It's part of the disrespect that you think that you can just put a body in front of kids.
A messaging problem that some say is fueling the exodus, and ultimately your kids could pay the price.
Our classes are going to be packed to the max, and unfortunately kids are going to have long-term subs or teachers are not qualified to teach those specific classes.
That Dallas school district says 98% of its positions are filled. Florida's Commissioner of Education says they've had more than 80 veterans apply for its program. And here in Cleveland, Ohio, the public school district in this city says that they've been having weekly recruiting events and are looking at more than 95% of their positions filled right now. But some of the strategies that we're talking about are literally just weeks old, so it's too soon to know the full scope of the impact that will have on retaining teaching talent and on the impact those practices will have on the quality of kids' education. Back to you.
Jesse Kirsch, thank you for that reporting. And turning now from the classroom to the voting booth. 4 states will be holding primaries tomorrow, and the state we'll be watching most closely is Wisconsin, where Democrats may have a chance to pick up a Senate seat while also trying to protect the governor's mansion. In the Senate primary, Democrats have already cleared the field for Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes to take the nomination. He'd then face Republican Senator Ron Johnson in November. But the Republican gubernatorial primary is a dead heat as the Trump wing of the party and the establishment wing of the party square off in these primaries yet again. Businessman Tim Michels, Trump's pick, is facing former Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch, who's backed by former Vice President Mike Pence and former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. NBC's Shaquille Brewster joins me now from Waukesha, Wisconsin. So, lots to talk about. Donald Trump's pick for governor, Tim Michels, hasn't said explicitly that the 2020 election was rigged. Is that surprising, especially considering Trump endorsed a challenger to Wisconsin's House Speaker who refused to try to overturn the election?
I think it could be surprising, especially the fact that you had former President Trump here in Waukesha just last week for supporting Tim Michels there. But I think one thing you also have to note with the Michels campaign, they have not been really talking to media much. So that's not a question that he's really received too much out after events, for example. So that's probably why he's been able to have some ambiguity there. But, you know, this is a race that is definitely, when you talk to voters, we've been here talking to voters throughout the day, they say they are confused because of those big names that you mentioned. Former President Trump, former Vice President Mike Pence, and then former Governor Scott Walker. I want you to listen to some of the interactions I've been having with Republican voters here as they prepare to head to the booth tomorrow.
I'm going to go with Trump. That's my thing.
You're going with what Trump suggests.
Exactly.
Over Scott Walker.
Yes.
I don't really think the endorsements affect my vote. I just think that it would be good to have someone leading this state that has not been connected to politics at all in their life. So I think that's why I'm making the vote for Michels.
There was a time when I was a supporter of Trump, which I have backed off on completely. So that kind of puts me against Michels. And quite honestly, I thought Rebecca was going to get the support of Trump because of Walker. So it's been kind of a flip-flop. So I just don't know who to trust. Yes, it's stressful.
You hear them saying it's stressful. Interestingly there, that last couple, that's a couple that voted for President Trump in 2016. Trump won the state in 2016. They then voted for President Biden in 2020. Biden won the state in 2020. So we'll be interested to see if that path of choosing the winning candidate, if that ends up going this time around. They said right now they're leaning toward Playfish, but they said their mind is not made up, and they're not going to make their mind up until they hit the voting booth tomorrow.
A mini focus group for you, Shaq. Keep in touch with those folks. I like them. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. After the break, the sprint to the midterms and the abortion ban backlash as Indiana becomes the first state to enact a near total ban since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. What it all means for November, the panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we've said, Democrats are on track to notch another major legislative win, with the House set to vote on the Inflation Reduction Act on Friday. It comes on the heels of a string of wins for Democrats last week, from the killing of al-Qaeda's leader to better than expected jobs numbers and the huge abortion win in Kansas. Democrats are now hoping to build on this momentum leading up to November. According to a memo obtained by NBC News, the DCCC, the campaign arm for House Democrats, believes they can capitalize on the extreme positions Republicans are taking on abortion ahead of the midterms, like what happened in Indiana this weekend, where the governor signed one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the U.S., making it the first state to enact a near total ban since the Supreme Court overturned Roe. I'm joined now by NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton. You've been looking into this. What exactly does this new law mean for women there?
Well, if you're a woman or girl in Indiana, this means abortion is basically gone, except for some very narrow exceptions, and that means rape, incest, only up to about 10 weeks, though, and then fetal abnormalities that could be lethal or a threat to the life of the mother. It also outlaws the work that clinics do in abortion services, so abortions will only be done at hospitals. To put that change in perspective, 98% of abortions done in that state are done at clinics. So this smaller group of hospitals is going to be where all that work, that narrow group of exceptions, will be done. So if you're a woman who lives in Indiana or one of the regional areas around Indiana that's dependent on the clinics there, you're going to need to go to Illinois or Michigan now. And frankly, this is, even though this legislation has been signed, the tension is still there because for Republicans, many of them feel like this didn't go far enough. They didn't want to accept exceptions. And of course, Democrats feel like this has gone way too far, and they plan to make it an issue, as you mentioned. Take a listen to some of the debate that happened there in the state.
Okay.
These kinds of decisions are never made in a vacuum, and there are polls going each way, but actually the insistence here is we protect as many people as possible.
If you're pro-life, you can't be happy. If you're pro-choice, you can't be happy. I don't know who left here happy. All I know is people need to go out and vote in November.
And Chris, Indiana has been at the center of the national conversation ever since the story of that 10-year-old girl who was raped in Ohio and went to the state for abortion care. Was followed by all of us, by the entire nation. And I think it really showed people the stakes here, right? An example of the kind of care that might no longer be available to women and girls, I should say, in that state now.
Antonia, thank you so much for that. I'm joined now by our panel. Leigh Ann Caldwell, co-author of the Washington Post's early 202. Symone Sanders, former advisor to Vice President Harris and host of Symone on MSNBC. And Noah Rothman, associate editor of The Commentary magazine and an NBC News contributor. So, Leigh Ann, what a contrast. In Kansas, people voted overwhelmingly, and it was overwhelmingly for abortion rights. In Indiana, lawmakers vote. It goes the other way. What does that tell us moving forward, if anything?
It tells us, it could tell us anyway, that the people have a much different opinion of what should happen regarding abortion in the states than lawmakers do. And that's some of the risk that that lawmakers have moving forward in these states that are controlled by Republicans and by a Republican governor who have campaigned and wanted restrictions on abortion or a ban on abortion, thinking that that's where most Republicans are, where most independents are, and, there's not many Democrats who are there. But what Kansas has shown is that voters, even Republican voters, think that that goes too far, that they do not want the government telling them how to live their lives. And so that is the risk moving forward. And that's why Democrats and activists on the ground are now organizing, because they think ballot initiatives is the way forward. Let the people choose in each of these states, not just in blue states, but in purple and red states too, Chris.
So, Noah, strategically, are Republicans overreaching here?
It depends on where. In order for Democrats to really capitalize on the Dobbs decision, they need Republican compliance. Democrats in Kansas didn't put this ballot initiative to the public. Republicans did. They did overreach in that case. There's a similar initiative in Alabama that did pass, however. So this is state specific. If Republicans at the federal level are smart, they would defer to the decision in the Alito decision and say that this is a state issue. I have opinions. I would like to see this go one direction or another. But at the federal level, the federal government, the Congress, has nothing to say on this matter. At the state level, you can organize and you might see some Democratic enthusiasm. But anything that takes the voter's eye off the fundamentals of this election, inflation, gas prices, and a referendum on Democratic governance in Washington, is to the detriment of Republicans, most certainly. Social issues like abortion count towards that.
Well, let me play part of Chuck's interview with Nancy Mace, the Republican congresswoman from South Carolina, yesterday talking about abortion.
Both sides have these extremities where the vast majority of people just are not there right now. And there has to be a place for the center on this very emotional issue. I do think that it will be an issue in November if we're not moderating ourselves, that we are including exceptions for women who've been raped, for girls who are victims of incest, and certainly in every instance where the life of the mother is at stake.
We should point out she's someone who has a strongly anti-abortion voting record. So, Symone, if she's saying there are going to be consequences, how many places, to Noah's point, do you feel this could potentially flip the vote? What do you think? And could it be enough places to maybe help the Democrats hold the House? Is it that strong an issue?
Well, you know what, Chris, it really depends, right? Because in the case of Kansas, voters were voting on a ballot initiative. There are not ballot initiatives across the country this November. This November, voters are going to the polls and they're voting on candidates. They're voting for their elected officials. And this is why people have to do their research. This is why my Democratic friends and some of my former colleagues, if they would like to win some of these races, they have to do the due diligence in talking to voters and explaining to them what the positions of these candidates are. You know, CPAC was the conservative, if you can even say conservative, convening recently happened. And these are not just, you go to CPAC and you hear all kinds of crazy things. These are things people are saying on the campaign trail, like Carrie Lake in Arizona, who was an election denier, right? You've got Tudor Dixon, who is now the candidate that's going to face Gretchen Whitmer in the governor's race in Michigan. Wisconsin, that we just talked about, is a little bit of a different tact, right? Because the candidate there is not an election denier. Any of the candidates haven't outrightly denied the election, but abortion is a top issue. So it depends on how folks are talking about it. But I will say this, abortion is an economic issue. And while for years some of my Republican friends were not running on, right, jailing women and doctors, fining women, forcing 10-year-olds to have babies by their rapists. That is exactly the policies that we are now seeing as a result of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and now some of these, not only just trigger laws, but in the case of Indiana, a brand new law. That's not popular with anybody.
So we're seeing, Noah, voter registration go up in places like Colorado, in Michigan, since the Dobbs decision. But I think, we just heard Symone lay out what a lot of issues are that Democrats can and probably will be talking about. How do you focus that? How do you take that and expand on what a lot of Democrats believe is a certain momentum that they didn't expect to have at this stage of the game?
I think Democrats run the risk of overreaching easily. As I said before, Republicans need to overreach in order for there to be a reaction to their overreach. What Democrats are benefiting from right now is a reaction to Republican sentiment. Before Dobbs, Republicans could have it easy. They could say, I want an abortion ban. Abortion is murder, and we need to ban it outright. Now that matters. There are consequences for that position. And if they act on it, which is outside the equilibrium of the American position on abortion, we don't even know what that is roughly, but we're trying to attain that right now. If Republicans put that issue to voters, they will lose. If Democrats focus on it prohibitively, even in the absence of some sort of Republican overreach, they look like they're the ones taking their eye off the primary concern among voters, which is the rising cost of daily life in the United States. That issue benefits Republicans, and any time they get the opportunity to say the governing party in control of all levers of government in Washington is not concerned about your pocketbook issues, and we are, that's a day Republicans win.
So that leads me to a question that a lot of people are asking, Leigh Ann. With all this momentum behind them on abortion, is now the time for Chuck Schumer to force a vote on codifying Roe? Or do you say, we've got these victories, let's take our victories and hit the road and tell all the voters about it?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any plans right now for Chuck Schumer to bring up another vote on codifying Roe. The Senate has already done that twice and failed. There's a couple things, though. One interesting thing is the Senate was in session all weekend, and they voted on dozens of amendments to pass their climate change health care bill. And Republicans put forward a ton of amendments that they thought were going to be difficult for Democrats to vote on. They were immigration, crime, economy, inflation. Something that wasn't included in that was abortion. And so that is really telling that Republicans did not want to vote on that issue as well. Now, separately, there's bipartisan legislation from Senator Kane and Collins that was just released in the past week or two about codifying Roe v. Wade. A lot of people on the left don't think it goes nearly far enough. Schumer hasn't really given a statement about that. The president hasn't really, or the White House hasn't really said where they stand on it. Perhaps that's an option in the fall. I don't know, but I don't see Schumer bringing this up again. It's failed. They don't want to draw attention to that, but they do think that they are on the right side politically of this issue, and they're going to keep hammering it on the campaign trail.
Yeah, but also I think, speaking of Chuck Schumer, Symone, he looked for him downright ebullient when they passed this bill. Democrats are indeed celebrating the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, but how do they use it as a midterm message, especially if the impacts aren't going to be felt immediately?
Look, I think you heard a little bit of that from the president today, Chris, right? He talked about how folks are going to start feeling this in the long term. I saw a tweet from my former colleague, Brian Deese, from the National Economic Council at the White House, who said people are going to start feeling this fall when it relates to prescription drug prices and the caps on insulin, for example. But the energy jobs, right, the climate pieces, those are things that are going to be more long term. Look, every Republican in the United States Senate yesterday, over the weekend, had an opportunity to vote for insulin caps for seniors who are on Medicare, and they all voted no. That is what you go out and you tell folks across the country. Republicans have experienced, I think it's anywhere between a 5 to 10% drop with seniors. That matters. Those are voters and definitely people that vote in the midterm election.
Symone, Leigh Ann, Noah, thank you all very much. And still to come, history in the making. I'll talk to one of the female Democratic candidates running to become, if you can believe it, Vermont's first woman ever elected to Congress. Molly Gray, Vermont's lieutenant governor, joins me after the break. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Voters in Vermont will be heading to the polls tomorrow and are on the cusp of making history by sending a woman to Congress for the first time in that state's history. Vermont is the only state that's never had a senator or representative who's a woman. With incumbent Congressman Peter Welch running for the state's open Senate seat, Vermont Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray and Senate President Pro Tem Rebecca Balint are vying for the Democratic nomination. The winner of tomorrow's Democratic primary is heavily favored to win in November. It is a deeply blue state. And while this race will be historic, it is also yet another race where a moderate Democratic candidate is facing off against a progressive candidate. Even the state's senators are split, with Bernie Sanders endorsing Balint, while retiring Senator Patrick Leahy is backing Gray. Joining me now, one of those women hoping to represent the state, Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray. Thanks for being with us. Why has Vermont, by the way, never had a woman in Congress?
That is such a good question, Chris, and it's wonderful to be on with you. I wish we had the answer, but I think it's important to recognize that this is historic because we only have 3 seats. We're one of 435 in the House. Of course, I have 2 senators, and we've been so well represented by an incredible congressional delegation. Senator Leahy, who I used to work for, Congressman Welch, who I used to work for, and of course, Senator Sanders as well. But we're the only state in the nation never to have sent a woman to Washington, and we're going to change that this year.
So is this really a battle for what being a Democrat means, progressive versus moderate?
I think this is really a question about what the future of Vermont is going to look like. We continue to say, as one of the oldest states in the nation, we're a small state, we're a rural state, we have a shrinking workforce and population, something I've worked to address as lieutenant governor, but it's really about how effective our federal delegation is in Washington. And we've been so lucky to have leaders like Senator Leahy. Obviously, being the chair of the Appropriations Committee is a huge deal, but he always keeps Vermont front of mind. Broadband access, access to water and sewer infrastructure, which is so desperately needed as we work to build more housing. Always thinking about our farmers and food producers. We're a big dairy and ag state, as you may know. And what Vermonters expect is someone who's going to work across the aisle, build the strongest coalitions, and really deliver for the state day in and day out. And, you know, there's been a lot of questions about this race and Senator Sanders getting involved and Senator Leahy getting involved. But what I think listeners and Vermonters and certainly Americans need to know is that we need pragmatic leaders now, leaders who are going to deliver for rural states, deliver for Vermont, and get things done for the American people.
But do you think those endorsements matter? What do you make, for example, of Elizabeth Warren's decision to back you in 2020 when you ran for lieutenant governor, but back your opponent in this race?
Well, I think my opponent's a progressive. She's been endorsed by the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congresswoman Jayapal, of course, Senator Sanders. There's 1.7, I think it's maybe more than that now. We'll see what the day brings, but at least $1.7 million pouring into Vermont from outside groups, trying to truly buy an election here in the state to elect the next, as the Boston Globe says, member of the squad. But Vermonters won't be bought. We have a lot of Vermonters in rural parts of the state. We always vote for the person. We put politics aside. We have one of the most popular Republican governors in the nation. I've been working with him as lieutenant governor. And I trust that tomorrow, when Vermonters go to the polls, they'll be thinking about pragmatism. They'll be thinking about the deep needs of our state, and they're going to elect the person who's going to do the best work for Vermont.
As we said, this is an overwhelmingly Democratic state. Would you say now that Joe Biden should be the party's nominee in 2024?
Oh, it's too early to say. I mean, right now, I'm honestly focused on getting through tomorrow, and polls are opening at 7 a.m. and closing at 7 p.m. and getting every Vermonter out to vote. But what I do feel really proud of, and what I know we've benefited from here in the state, is a focused leadership that is thinking about infrastructure, broadband access. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to be huge for us as a small rural state. And whether it's Joe Biden in the White House next term or someone as pragmatic and thoughtful, they will have my support.
We only have 30 seconds left, but specifically, what will the new legislation mean for Vermont? How will it impact your state?
We have a lot of Vermonters, I think a lot of Americans right now, who are struggling at the pump. They're seeing it, they're feeling it. A lot of Vermonters are already thinking about how they're going to heat their homes in the winter. So to have money that's going to support weatherization programs, supporting getting more and more Vermonters into electric vehicles, supporting prescription drug costs, that is huge for us as a state that has a lot of folks who just depend on prescription drugs every single day. So it's a massive effort, and it's a good example of the leadership style that I'll bring to Congress as Vermont's first Congresswoman, building the strongest coalitions, getting things done. That's what Vermonters deserve, and that's what the American people deserve.
Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray, thank you. And thank you all for watching. Kristen Welker will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, and she will be joined by Becca Balint, the other leading Democratic candidate in that Vermont primary. NBC News Now coverage continues with Tom Costello in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.